A couple people asked if this is going to be a lamentation. The answer is, of course, no. Because, while I hate this game, and let me be very clear about that, I hate this game. The fact of the matter is, I can't in any way call it a really particularly bad game. In fact, I have covered and streamed many worse games than this in the past, in the recent past even. So, no, this isn't a lamentation. It's not even a net negative on the final golden number. But I suppose I should clarify some of that stuff, shall we? Where do I even begin? This is the first and hopefully only game I've ever actually had to give a viewer content discretion warning for. If this is if you are bothered by things like eye stuff or teeth stuff or general visceral gore, like organs outside of the body kind of gore, or suicide stuff, or abuse stuff, or self-harm stuff, or a whole host of other things, then you should probably not play this game. It is very open and brutal in how it is presented, to the point where it was bothersome, and I actually had a lot of viewers pop in and be like, okay, and then leave. And that's fine, no judgment, of course. Truth be told, I honestly probably shouldn't have allowed this game onto the stream, onto the schedule, but this was a very, very brief period of time where one particular person was lobbying for a whole lot of horror games, and I felt bad, so I was like, okay, fine. And as a direct consequence, I don't do that anymore, so we're kind of at an official no more horror games with asterisks kind of an approach, because of stuff like this. Now, the fact that the game bothered me so much is whatever, right? It doesn't change the quality of the game. So how's the actual quality of the game? Well, this is a point-and-click adventure game. So at its core, what a point-and-click adventure game should be about is a bit of a logic puzzle, right? Okay, so you've got this, this, and that, and you need to get over there, but you can't get over here while getting over there, because this is in the way. So if I can solve this and this, that'll help me solve that, which will get that out of the way so I can get over there. That's what a point-and-click adventure game should be. There are a few that are that way. I can think of two off the top of my head, one of which we've had the great pleasure of actually reviewing, Return of the Obra Dinn. Now, I know what you're thinking. Return of the Obra Dinn isn't a point-and-click adventure game, but it kind of is. It's what a point-and-click adventure game should be, to put it bluntly. So that was an awesome game. It was like plus 14 or something to gameplay in the end. So really, really good game. So that's the direction that should be leaning in, right? Instead, what point-and-click adventure games tend to be is nonsense, what TV Tropes usually refers to as moon logic. In other words, you need to pick up a feather, and in so doing, make the worm think that it's okay to come out. And when the worm comes out, the bird gets it and goes and flies off to the nest. But the extra weight makes the nest tilt over, which causes the leaves to spread all over the yard. And the leaves catch fire, which makes the person run away. And as he's running away, he runs into the water and splashes. And as a result, blah, 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 blah. You get the idea. You know what that is. If you've ever played any kind of point-and-click adventure game, you know the bizarro chain of events that tends to happen. Because that's always what it is. It's just kind of trial and erroring. There's no logic. There's no gameplay involved. And that's the bluntest way I could put that. Because there's not actually a functional game there. Gone Home has more gameplay than most point-and-click adventure games. Telltale games have more gameplay than most point-and-click adventure games. Now, I personally feel, this is just an opinion, that a lot of point-and-click adventure games kind of lean into that on purpose, that they're just there to be a vehicle for the story, so the actual gameplay is so irrelevant as to be non-existent. Whether that's valid or not, that's up to you. I don't have anything else to add to that to the moment. But I will say that there are good ones out there, and this is definitely one of the above-average ones. There are a few specific puzzles and a few specific chains of events which were just, especially towards the end. Pretty much all of Chapter 5 was one big, I have no idea what I'm doing chain. But a lot of the earlier stuff made a degree of sense, and the actual puzzles, because there were individual puzzles as you were progressing through it, were kind of neat and kind of interesting, and actually had solutions and hints and all the things that a proper puzzle needs. So there was gameplay. Better than average gameplay. Now, There wasn't much, admittedly, because the whole focus is on the narrative. But I suppose the next thing I want to talk about is a twofold point, because I've already mentioned this. This is a horror game, obviously, and I don't like horror games. But lore, I hear you say, and I don't know why you sound like that, but lore. I should do the Grand Negus. Lore. Excuse me. For some reason, Grand Negasek is watching my stream, watching my video right now, and he says, Lar, maybe you should try to do something else with your things, like redefine your horror thing. And I'm like, well, what do you mean, Grand Negasek? And Zach says, well, you see. I'll stop. The thing is, I tend to like horrifying games. We've talked about this before. But I don't like horror games. I like Metroid. I like Half-Life. I like Assassin's Creed. I do not like Fran. I don't like Silent Hill. And I don't like... of course, I can't think of another example right now. I don't know that many examples because I don't play them, because I don't like them. They're not my thing, right? Games that are specifically and explicitly setting out to be horror games just aren't interesting for me for the most part. I asked a few people on stream why they liked this game, and a few people gave some interesting answers. I wanted to share one of them because it really struck a chord with me. One of the hypothetical appeals that was posited was the idea of being able to experience things like thrill and fear and horror without any actual tangible detriments thereto. Let me explain that a little bit better. God, what is in my eye? So, there's a game out there called Fallout 3, right? I know I use this exact same example on stream, but whatever. This is a post-stream summary. What do you want from me? So, Fallout 3. And Fallout 3 is horrible. Like, if you were just sort of teleported into the capital wasteland of Fallout 3 right now, that would suck. You would have to deal with constantly being cooked by radiation, and people and monsters and robots trying to kill you in all directions. Even just going to the bathroom would be a thing. There's no toilet paper. Most places don't have running water. The places that do have running water have radiation, just very dirty, unclean water, which is going to mean a lot of illness and a lot of unpleasantness. Don't even think about the food you eat. It's all awful, right? But playing Fallout 3 is fun. Okay, yeah, go ahead, get the joke out. But you get my point. If you were to play Fallout 3 or to holodeck a Fallout 3 scenario, that's fun. Because you have all of the benefits with none of the detriments. You don't actually have to deal with all that irritation and frustration and aggravation and pain and horror and discomfort and nausea and death. You get to enjoy the feelings thereto without having to take the consequences that come with those. Thus, and I'm bringing this up because this in many ways helps to explain a theory of why some people enjoy these kinds of games. They get to be startled or scared or have that adrenaline of being chased by something without any of the negative connotations that go with that, without knowing that they're actually going to die if they trip and stumble and the killer catches them with a knife, right? And I kind of understand that. Any of you who saw my Resident Evil 2 remake stream knows that I really enjoyed the Mr. X sequences. They're a little bit too truncated, a little bit too scripted, but they're really awesome, and they're very adrenaline pumping. It was very tense, and I liked that. I was into that. So I get the concept. I think part of the problem for me specifically, and this is just opinion, I'm not even sure about this, is that certain things just cross a line for me, and I have to compartmentalize them essentially out of existence in order to even tolerate them. Certain things include body horror, anything like viscerally gore or organs or blood or multiple heads being sewn together into forming someone's torso, that kind of a thing, just to name a random example. That bothers me to a point where I can't enjoy that, even knowing that it's just a picture on a screen, right? Similarly, anything that crosses over a certain psychological line, things like abuse or helplessness, or things about, maybe, for example, a child being taken care of by people who are actively trying to hurt and misuse her. Which brings us back to this game. This game crossed so many lines for me in the first chapter that honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that this is my job and I am a professional, I would have put the game down immediately. And I want to mention that because Chapter 1, The Asylum, is by far the worst chapter in the game. I don't mean in terms of quality. I mean in terms of how horrific it is. It is really, really bad, to such a horrific extent that I wouldn't blame anyone if they, for example, didn't want to watch the VOD of Chapter 1. I myself am going to be just kind of mentally ejecting it and pretending I never played it, because that's how I'm going to deal with it. Compartmentalization, right? Yeah, just, okay, it was over there, and now it's done, and now we've moved on. I actually talked about that when we were discussing Psychonauts 1. But I wanted to explain one other thing, too, because I feel like some people don't quite get why certain things bother them. And I think Mapoindexter came up with a beautiful analogy during the stream. Imagine you see a picture of the cute little fluffy kitten. It's just, hi. Now, does that bother you? Does that get to you? Does it affect you? No, of course not, because it's divorced from context. Now assume for a moment that what you know is that this is a picture taken mere seconds before some horrific attack happened. The picture taken 20 seconds later is of the kitten in 15 different pieces. Blood and viscera strewn across the cement, as it is mewling, pathetically trying to survive as its nerves finally shut down. So, now present context, that picture of that kitten would bother you. Or at least I would hope it would. Because now you know what it means. Now it means something to you, and, well, you get it, right? Whereas someone else just sees it and says, oh, it's just a cute little kitten. And I bring that up because that's kind of going back to what I meant about with lines, right? We all have different things that get to us, and context is usually why. Maybe we've been through something. Maybe there's just certain things we can't process, or things we can't compartmentalize. Or maybe there's certain things that remind us of things, and so forth and so on, right? Now, you probably want me to talk about the story. Before we actually talk about the story, I'm just going to mention something. I had some theories and some theory crafting, going on early on. I stopped doing that at a certain point, and I want to explain why. At a certain level, too much of a thing causes it to be noise. I've talked about this before with regards to pacing, with regards to action, with regards to violence, all sorts of stuff, right? Like music is another one, or absence of music. If you do too much of a thing, it stops being what it is, and it just sort of starts becoming noise. So if you have a game that is weird and creepy, grotesque is actually, I think, a good word for this one. After a while, I honestly stopped processing what was going on. Like there was this one bit, this is very late in the game. We walk into the room, and there's this giant cat with a latch on its back and a tail making a bridge over to a tree which had a glove on it, sitting in an abyss over nothing, with like a flaming skull face that's dangling from a tree by its hair. And the person walking in was like, what the hell is this? And what's funny is I'm looking at that like, what? Because at this point, all I'm seeing is this giant thing of white noise, because it's become so... It's been doing it so much that the whole rest of the game has annulled me to what I'm looking at. It's like, okay, and? It's just noise. So at a certain point, I stopped being able to do my job as as a ruminator properly. I think I did my job properly as a reviewer, because I can still review the game and the story. But I don't have many thoughts to share about the narrative, because what the hell do you say about something like this? Except for the 3 paths. Let's get this out of the way first, and most obviously. Path number 1 is none of the events of the game are literal. This is all an interpretation or a representation of what's going on in Fran Bo's head as she's being experimented on and abused by a 1940s asylum. It is the most horrible, horrific, and nightmarish possible option, and that's why we're going to take it and throw it out the goddamn window and never think about it again. Done. Now, the other 2 options are that this is a little bit more literal. Now, there's still 2 branching paths, but they're very similar to each other here. Option 1 is that this is completely literal, and option 2 is that this is mostly literal. So let's explore these a little bit, shall we? We see early on that when you enter the ultra reality, and when you could see all the stuff, a lot of what's happening is representative. Probably my favorite, hate to use that word, example here is there's a woman, there's a nurse, and then we enter ultra reality and we see a skeleton, and dangling out of the skeleton is a dead fetus, because that's the kind of game we're playing here. But what does this mean? Well, it means that woman either had a stillbirth or a failed childbirth. The child died in childbirth. Again, 1940s. So That kind of stuff, implication and indication, exists in almost every single one of the areas. And almost every place where you can see the ultra-reality, there's a logic to what you're seeing and what it represents. Now that can mean one of two things. Either the ultra-reality literally exists, and you use it in order to see other possibilities of what's happening, or it is the brain attempting to put patterns onto nonsense, which ties into what I was just talking about. In short, what I am hypothesizing with the second path is that there is another layer to reality, but it's not something cohesive. It's not something that actually applies to human thought processes. But certain people can, perceive it to some extent or another, a gradient, if you will. And in so perceiving it, they try to put patterns to it. That's what this thing does. The human mind is very much designed to see patterns in nonsense. It's why optical illusions work. It's why certain studies on isolation or certain levels of absence or overpresence of stimuli tend to lead to people seeing patterns in things. It's because the brain is designed to do that. It's like, yep. Got to make sense of it, right? This is a real psychological thing. So that's the possibility. Now, I don't like that possibility as much as the third possibility, because the second possibility also means that towards the end of the game, small spoilers, when we're shot, we're probably actually dying, and Dr. I'm Evil is actually extracting our brain, and what we're seeing in those final few seconds is us just kind of the brain having a few last moments before it fizzles out, which is not only something I dislike in general, but also makes the entire game much more horrific. So we're going to eject that one too. That leaves option 3. This is literally happening. Hear me out for a second. The idea here is that there's, let's call it the mundane reality. That's the third reality. Then there's the realities before it and the realities after it. Each of them is tied to a specific tone and theme, if you're paying attention. Now, we only really have any visiting acknowledgement of 2 of them. One is the 5th at the end of the game, and one is, I think it's the 2nd, but it's the tree reality. I forget which number it is. And of those, we see that the rules and the logic of those settings operate differently, but are actually self-consistent if you pay attention and zoom the camera out a little bit. You'll see that the Fey reality, which is what the tree reality effectively is a place where logic is dictated by the structure of which you say something. So in other words, that's a terrible way to phrase that. Things make sense because they make sense, rather than things make sense because that's how things work. I'm still explaining this badly, but I hope you at least vaguely understand what I'm talking about. And then, of course, in the 5th reality, everything's horrible and awful, but that's considered to be a good thing. It's the extreme end of emotions. If I was to refer to it in a more simplistic term, I'd say the 5th reality is is that the id? I can never remember which one's which. It's the one that's just pure emotive response. We actually talked about this in Psychonauts 2 as well. That kind of core, fundamental, whatever it is. It's not ego. I know it's not ego. Where the mind and the thoughts are just bare bones, basic impulses and instincts, primarily of extremes and usually towards negatives like anger, fear, regret, guilt, hate, etc. And that's what we see predominantly in the 5th thing. Now, they seem to be not to extremes. It's not some kind of place, but everything that they do and say there is rather patterned in that particular method. And there's a reason why, even when they're being helpful and kind, they're talking about causing you great suffering, or how wonderfully delicious our tears are because of the pure sorrow that is going through them, etc. This is also tied into the idea of the Kamalas, the demons, let's call them what they are, and their ability and desire to feed off of that suffering. This would also explain why so many of those were attached to the kids back in the asylum. Pretty strong place to get a whole lot of pain and suffering from. But then I started thinking about something else, too. This is just one little side thought here, but imagine for a moment that this is literally happening. That would mean that some of the kids in the asylum can see, they can perceive the Kamalas, they can perceive the other layers of reality. Interesting. And that would explain why they're insane, because they don't really know how to process or explain what they're seeing, and what they're seeing is very fantastical. The other thought that was occurring to me is they would probably be lumped in with the exact same group of kids who are just insane, actually insane, something wrong with them, insane. This really got me, I really got thinking about this, because there's the one kid who says he's a king. You got to give him a drawing, so he gives you his cane. Right? You remember that? I was thinking about that because there's no real Kamala connection to him. He's just delusional. But there is one to most of the others, and most of the others directly reference theirs as if they can see them and understand them, right? Thus, I got to thinking, what if we are specifically in the exact same format as this, that we're someone who can perceive this, and as a result are just lumped in with all the rest? After all, this is a 1940s asylum. I keep mentioning that because it really frames so much of the story so perfectly. At that point, everything in the game makes perfect sense. At the end of the game, we reach a point where it's like, all right, the guy who is existing in the fifth reality is trying to rip out our brain in order to gain control over the realities. Okay, that makes sense. And we just kind of say nope to all of that. Also, we were taking a different version of drug earlier, which unlocked our potential. We actually are able to use our ability to see other realities without any additional drugs, simply by concentrating and using our thoughts properly. So that tracks with that. And at the end, our allies from the tree reality come back and say, yeah, no, let's get the crap out of here. And so they get the crap out of there. And peace out. Remore hasn't been dealt with. In fact, there are several dangling threads not dealt with. But at the very least, we can have some kind of ending that involves us no longer having to deal with any of this nonsense. After all, there is no peace, happiness, or joy that's going to be left within the third reality, aka the mundane one, Earth. So all of that tracks. It makes a weirdly large amount of sense. Now, I haven't actually really looked extensively into I hesitate to call it sequel, but the other game that is connected to this one, which is it's such a sequel that I can't even think of the name of it right now. Give me 1 second. I'll look it up really quick here. But I do know that there are some connections that are supposed to happen. Little Misfortune, that's it. They are supposed to happen within the same setting. And I'm told it's even more horrifying, actually, so that's funny. Anyways, sorry, getting off topic. But I'm never playing it, so don't ask. Normally, I'd say I hope you enjoyed my thoughts. As is, I hope you tolerated them. I'll see you next time.